We've already talked about how World War I is what is really going to end the progressive era in the United States. But World War I actually began several years before the United States got officially involved. When you look at the causes of the war, they can be summed up by a few main points. First of all, you have to look at all the instability going on in Europe at this time. Many nations were really focusing on their nationalism or that extreme pride in their country. It was more than just patriotism and being proud of your country. It was this nationalist idea, or nationalism is when you are so proud that you just believe that your country should go out and make other countries more like yours. So this one kind of goes hand in hand with imperialism. You have all of these old empires in Europe that are ruling over countries that don't want to be ruled over anymore. So these are very old, entrenched empires that are going to be really exerting their control over places. The alliance system, which we'll talk about. But the way I want us to remember it is from the acronym MAIN. We can talk about the main causes of World War I. The M stands for militarism. This means they are building up their militaries and glorifying their militaries. Germany specifically was very well known for this at this point in time. They are increasingly building up their military, emphasizing their military, talking about this is going to be the time when they're going to become great. So militarism. Anytime you have this militarism, when one nation builds up their military, their neighboring nations are also going to build up their militaries for protection and defense. But this also increases tension. Your alliance system. This is when you are simply making a relationship with a country to ensure each other's mutual defense. So we're going to talk more about that too. Imperialism. We've already know what imperialism is. This is when you are going to take over other countries for your country's economic prosperity. You're going to try to make money, and it's all going to be about going out and taking over other weaker countries. So imperialism. And finally, nationalism, that extreme pride in one's country, that idea that you should go out and take over other places because your country is just worthy of that. Looking more specifically at the alliance system at this point is going to lead to an arms race. Now, when we say an arms race, what we mean is that you have these countries that are building up their weapons. They are building up their militaries, they're building up their weapons, and just like we said, it becomes a race because each country wants to have more weapons and a better military than their neighboring countries. Again, mostly for mutual defense, so they can protect each other and protect themselves from other aggressive nations. The Triple Alliance, which is also known as the Central Powers, that's what I want you to know it as. The Central Powers is going to be made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, which is also known as Turkey. So you see those here listed on the map. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey, which right here, this is going to be the Ottoman Empire. Those are the Central Powers. They were all allied together. The Triple Entente, which I want you to know them as the Allies, is going to include France, Great Britain, and Russia. This is the side, here you go, Great Britain, France, and Russia. This is the side that when the United States does get actively involved, this is the side that we will join. The war begins. There had been a lot of instability already in Europe at this point in time, but the war is really going to begin when you have the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. There was a group of rebels in Serbia who wanted, in Austria, who wanted to be a part of Serbia. They were ethnic Serbs, and they were trying to protest for that particular right. They were trying to break away and join in with Serbia. The Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, is going to be riding in a parade, which you see here in this picture, when groups of this organization called the Black Hand are going to come out and assassinate him, which is what you see here. This is the spark that starts the war. This was that political assassination that started the beginning of the war. That assassination is the thing that pushed everything else over the edge. It's going to cause a chain reaction. After that assassination, Austria-Hungary demands that Serbia turn over these members of this organization, and they demand to be allowed to investigate this. But obviously, Serbia, being a sovereign nation, is not going to allow that. So what happens is Austria-Hungary says if they don't do that, they put an ultimatum on them, so they will then declare war, which is exactly what happens. But that's where your chain reaction comes into play. Because when Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, Serbia's allies then get involved and declare war. And when that happens, then Austria-Hungary's allies get involved and declare war. So this is where that chain reaction, and this is how the majority of the world winds up getting involved in this war. It very quickly is going to develop into trench warfare. After the Germans are going to try to defeat France, they go in. Their goal was to defeat France early so they could then turn their attention to their other enemies. But trench warfare is where both sides are literally going to just dig in. They're going to build trenches as a part of their battle plan, and we'll see that used heavily in this war. But this is what happens. It was a part of what was called the Schlieffen Plan, and they wanted to defeat France because they knew that they had war on two fronts. So they've got one front along the west, which is against France, and then another front along the eastern front, which was with Russia. So they knew that if they had to split their forces, that they would automatically be weaker. So they wanted to defeat France first and then turn their attention to Russia. But it doesn't really happen that way. Now, your allies, they want to make sure that Germany has to fight a two-front war for the same reasons I already told you. They knew that they would be weaker if they were forced to fight on those two fronts. So you need to remember that two-front war, the fact that Germany is having to fight in two separate locations at the same time makes them weaker because it's splitting all of their military, their resources into two locations. At the beginning of this war, the United States declares neutrality, meaning we were going to stay out of it. We wanted no part of active fighting in this war. However, we were more sympathetic towards the Allies. We had more closer connections with the people from Allied countries. So what happens is we begin to export war materials, but only to the Allies. So we weren't selling war materials to Germany, even though we were saying we were neutral. We were only selling them to the Allies. That makes a big difference. Germany begins using something called unrestricted submarine warfare. So make sure right before submarine warfare there that you write in unrestricted. So this is unrestricted submarine warfare by Germany, where they were going in using their submarines to sink any ship that came into what they considered their enemy's territory. They're trying to prevent their enemy from getting those war materials that they needed. In 1916, Woodrow Wilson wins the election, and one of his campaign slogans was, "He kept us out of war." That shows you that since he won the election with partially using that slogan, it shows you that the American people really wanted to stay out and remain isolationist and stay out of those foreign affairs. The war stalemates. A stalemate is when neither side is winning or losing. Because of this trench warfare, you see the trench warfare. You see a trench here on the top right picture where these soldiers are living in trenches. They've dug these trenches. They're living in these trenches. You see the terrible conditions there. Over the top is when these soldiers would go from inside the trench over the top of the trench across no man's land to attack the enemy. Now, no man's land is that land between the trenches. Remember, if you're in a trench, you are in a strategically better position than those who are running across the top of that ground in between the trenches. Those who are moving across the top are not going to just be running across an open field. They are going to be having to navigate various obstacles that were placed there, barbed wire, things like that. So they're really kind of sitting ducks. This is a new type of war. We've got new technology here. You see in this bottom right picture the gas mask that these soldiers are wearing because we were using mustard gas and other poisons, terrible, terrible weapons. We see submarines really put into play in this war, and the use of airplanes, the very first time we see airplanes used in war. And you see here the deadliest the weapon of this war is going to be that machine gun. Again, because of the style of warfare we're using with trenches and then using that machine gun, it was very easy to just take out a large number of people in a short amount of time. We continue to export those war materials, and as we are doing that, Germany is going to be sinking. They're using their U-boats or submarines to sink any ship that came into what they considered their enemy's territory. And in 1915, they are going to sink a British passenger liner called the Lusitania. Now, yes, it was a British passenger liner. However, there were Americans on board, and this kills almost 1,000 people. Now, when this happens, Germany realizes that the United States is very close to getting involved, and they want to prevent that from happening. So they do something called the Sussex Pledge. They promise that they will stop using unrestricted submarine warfare. They promise that if they were going to sink a ship, they would give them warning so that anyone on board could then get off of the boat, and that way they could just sink those war materials instead of killing all of the people. So that's what you see here. So the Lusitania was that passenger liner, meaning it was like a cruise ship basically, that was sunk by those U-boats and did kill many people. Many Americans were furious over this. But that's not the end. After he wins that election in 1916, he is going to call for peace worldwide. Obviously, it doesn't work. Then the United States intercepts what's called the Zimmermann Note or the Zimmermann Telegram. This was a note from the German foreign minister to Mexico, and it was telling Mexico that if they would invade the United States and engage the United States in war, then after Germany had won the war in Europe, they would come help Mexico retake all of those lands that they lost to us in the Mexican-American War. Basically, they are trying to preoccupy the United States with war on our own soil so that we would not go and get involved in Europe. This is not going to make Americans happy at all. In fact, we are so angry over this that many are calling for war now because we did not like that Mexico was trying to be provoked to get involved by attacking the United States. So this is going to call many Americans into supporting a war effort that before this they had been supporting the neutrality. So those two things, the sinking of the Lusitania, then when we intercept that Zimmermann note, those two things are going to really push the United States into war, into what was called then the Great War. And we will then begin gathering our troops so we can send them overseas.